It took exactly 47 seconds for the granite-faced official to realize the file was real. 4 to 7 seconds of dead silence in the Dirksen Senate hearing room, a silence that severed the political lifeline of Kash Patel and opened a vault of government secrets no one believed existed, secrets detailing the highest-level obstruction in the Epstein investigation. The room, built for solemnity and political theater in equal measure, was already heavy with expectation. Above the witness table, the high, narrow windows of the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, SSCI, hearing room allowed the weak November light to cut across the thick, dust motes dancing air. The illumination fell squarely on Kash Patel, the former Chief of Staff to the Acting Secretary of Defense, now serving as a special advisor to a low-profile interagency task force. He sat utterly still, a study in controlled defiance, flanked by 2 attorneys whose expensive suits seemed designed to absorb and deflect hostile stares. The official seal of the Senate Judiciary Committee, etched into the bronze plaque behind the dais, reflected dully off the high-gloss mahogany table. Patel's presence was necessitated by a congressional subpoena related to the internal handling and classification review of documents pertaining to the Jeffrey Epstein investigation, specifically those that crossed the threshold between the FBI and the Executive Office of the President between 2018 and 2021. This was not a trial. It was oversight. But in Washington, oversight, when executed by an individual like Senator Pramila Jayapal, Democrat Washington, could feel fatally close to cross-examination. Jayapal, the chairwoman of the Senate Subcommittee on Constitutional Oversight, sat centered on the dais. Her posture was erect, her tone surgical, devoid of the partisan fire that often characterized these hearings. She held a black leather binder, its contents carefully guarded, and adjusted the static microphone before her with meticulous precision. "Mr. Patel," Jayapal began, her voice low and even, the first sound to truly break the oppressive silence. "For the record, your designation as an authorized custodian of records, pursuant to the Presidential Records Act of 1978 and internal DOJ-FBI protocols, was revoked on January 20, 2021. Is that correct?" Patel leaned forward, his voice a practiced, clipped baritone. "That is correct, Chairwoman. I left government service on that date. And your later, non-governmental advisory role did not grant you access, storage, or authority over previously classified or administratively controlled records, correct? Specifically, those designated with the SCIFONLY marker pertaining to the multi-jurisdictional Epstein inquiry, reference file 1947H? That, Chairwoman, is correct. I maintained no access or authority after my departure," Patel responded, a flicker of boredom in his eyes. He looked toward his counsel, a gesture that signaled confidence, not reliance. The political tone was set, a high-level official claiming full, legal compliance, protected by the bureaucracy he once mastered. He was here to endure, not to confess. But the atmosphere was beginning to thin, like oxygen being subtly removed from the room. Jayapal was not looking at him. She was looking at the thin, precise notes she had scribbled on a yellow legal pad, notes that seemed too brief for the scale of the accusation. A photographer's flash momentarily froze the scene. Patel's confident smirk, the cool marble walls, and Jayapal's unwavering concentration. The camera eye perspective captured the political stakes, an institutional power trying to reassert its dominance over an alleged institutional failure. The next question would not be about dates or titles. It would be about paper, custody, and the law. But the silence wasn't over yet. Senator Jayapal's approach was deliberate and cold, lacking the histrionics common to televised hearings. She focused not on the sensational contents of the Epstein files, but on the precise bureaucratic mechanisms designed to protect them, and the legal failure to uphold those mechanisms. This was a hearing about the chain of custody, a process as dry as it was critical. "Mr. Patel, let's turn our attention to the period between December 2020 and January 20, 2021, Jayapal continued, adjusting her glasses. "During that transition, you personally oversaw the relocation and inventory of records designated EOP sensitive, from the Office of the Secretary of Defense to a temporary facility. Your signed internal directive, marked Exhibit A, confirms this. Is that accurate?" Patel nodded curtly. I confirm I was responsible for ensuring the secure transfer of departmental records, consistent with my clearance and the DoD Manual 5200-01 Standards for Controlled Unclassified Information, or CUI. Precisely. And CUI, particularly concerning foreign intelligence and investigative data, falls under the strict inventory requirements of the Federal Records Act, FRA, 44 U.S.C. Chapter 33. The FRA mandates a documented transfer to the National Archives and Records Administration, NARA, or a designated successor custodian upon your departure. Do you agree with the legal requirement of transfer? I agree with the law, Chairwoman, Patel replied, his tone starting to tighten. And I assert that all official, federal records were catalogued and transferred. We had thousands of boxes. We followed protocol. He subtly shifted his weight in the chair, a barely perceptible signal of building tension. Jayapal did not rush him. She paused, letting the silence magnify the weight of the law she had just cited. But here is where the confusion begins, Mr. Patel. Section 3302 of the FRA requires detailed administrative controls, meaning an official inventory log, signed by both the transferring and receiving custodians. Yet, when NARA conducted its post-transfer audit on March 15, 2021, their report, Exhibit B, noted a discrepancy. Specifically, they flagged 47 uncatalogued EOP-sensitive files, all cross-referenced to the Epstein inquiry, File 1947H, which were physically signed out under your name from the FBI's Records Management Division on December 14, 2020. Can you explain where those 47 files are now? Patel's composure faltered only slightly. His eyes darted to his lead attorney, who leaned in. Chairwoman, with respect, records are often recategorized or merged into larger, ongoing departmental binders. An audit discrepancy of 47 files among thousands is not evidence of a violation. Those documents were likely incorporated into a general transfer. But they weren't, Jayapal countered calmly, placing the NARA report on the table. The audit specifically checked the incorporation theory. The files in question, all bearing the unique EOP-sensitive header, are missing from the final transfer log. Under 18 U.S.C. Section 2071, concealment, removal, or mutilation generally, even the temporary and authorized removal of federal documents, particularly those related to an active foreign national investigation, constitutes a serious criminal offense. So, let me ask a simpler question, Mr. Patel. Did you, or anyone acting on your direct authority, retain any of those 47 documents in an unofficial capacity after your employment ended? The direct legal challenge hung in the air. Patel took a sip of water, his hand showing the first small tremor. The easy confidence had evaporated, replaced by the rigid posture of a man fighting for legal ground. The camera flashes became more frequent, tiny bursts of white light illuminating the sudden pallor on his face. He knew the difference between a political accusation and a direct statutory inquiry. He needed time. Chairwoman, I need to consult with counsel regarding the precise statutory language of 2071 versus the duties under the PRA. My intent was always compliance. But I do not recall retaining any specific file outside of official channels. His answer, legally cautious, cinematically confirmed the rising action. Jayapal smiled, not kindly, but with the measured satisfaction of an investigator closing a net. The missing documents weren't an oversight. They were a potential crime, one that suggested deliberate action. Let the record reflect the witness needs counsel to recall his actions regarding highly classified federal material, Jayapal stated dryly. Mr. Patel, the problem isn't just that the documents are missing. The problem is what they might have contained. And what you knew. We will recess for 5 minutes. She gavelled the break, her eyes never leaving Patel, who now looked less like a confident official and more like a man suddenly feeling the weight of the marble walls around him. The missing 47 files were not dry bureaucratic entries. They were the key to the next chapter. But the silence wasn't over yet. When the hearing resumed, the atmosphere was palpably different. Patel's attorneys were huddled, whispering urgently, while Senator Jayapal returned to the dais with a new document. The light fixtures in the massive room, often too cool and white, now seemed to highlight the tension lines etched around the eyes of everyone present. "Mr. Patel," Jayapal stated, ignoring his counsel's attempt to interject. "The issue is not one of routine transfer error. The issue is a deliberate attempt to sanitize the record of investigative materials related to a highly sensitive case. Let's look at what the missing files represent." The 47 uncatalogued files were identified as containing original FBI FD 302 forms, witness interview summaries, and communications logs pertaining to the Epstein grand jury inquiry, docket 19 CR 344. She held up a single, heavily redacted piece of paper. "I now submit into the Record Exhibit C, a Department of Justice internal memorandum, dated January 5, 2021, and signed by the then Attorney General's Chief of Staff. This memo directs your office, specifically, to prioritize the classification review of all FD 302s associated with the 1947H file before final transfer to NORA. The memo explicitly states that certain witness statements contain executive privilege concerns related to high-profile foreign and domestic figures." Patel's jaw tightened. This was no longer about a records inventory. It was about political motivation for the record's disappearance. "Chairwoman, that memo simply reflects standard operating procedure for protecting privileged communications during a transition. It ensures that executive branch communications are properly shielded under Article 2 of the Constitution." If that were true, Mr. Patel, why does the classification review memo, which you acknowledged receiving, refer to a specific, unique file identification number, F302 Trump OFC 43, that is not listed in any subsequent transfer or destruction log? This designation, according to an internal Inspector General report I have here, was only used for the interview summaries where a specific, high-ranking political figure was either referenced by witnesses or named as a direct associate. She leaned in, her voice dropping, forcing the room to strain to hear. "The Federal Rules of Criminal Procedure, Rule 6(e), governs the secrecy of grand jury materials. It does not permit the executive branch to unilaterally categorize witness statements as executive privilege unless specific steps are taken to formally assert that privilege in federal court. Yet, these F302s, where the former president's name was clearly a factor, vanished without a court order, without a formal privilege claim, and in direct violation of the recording and reporting requirements outlined in Section 114(b) of the Intelligence Authorization Act for fiscal year 2017. Which governs the handling of high-value informant data." Patel's composure completely cracked. He was now sweating visibly under the bright lights. He stammered, "Chairwoman, I can't speak to the naming conventions used by the investigative agents. My role was purely administrative. I was managing the bulk transfer of records, not their content. I deny any knowledge of a specific file named F302 Trump OFC 43. His denial was too fast, too specific, and sounded rehearsed. He was attempting to rely on the defense of legal ignorance, a thin shield in a Senate hearing. Jayapal did not raise her voice. She simply removed her glasses, a gesture that signaled the end of the bureaucratic defense. "Your denial is noted, Mr. Patel. But the legal implication here is clear. You were directed to flag specific materials involving highly sensitive political figures, and those materials vanished. The Constitution mandates transparency in these areas unless proper legal steps are taken. Your administrative actions led to a criminal failure in custody, and that failure facilitated the cover-up of material evidence in a federal investigation. This suggests a violation of the Obstruction of Justice Statute, 18 U.S.C. Section 1505, by concealing evidence sought in a congressional inquiry." The air pressure in the room felt physically heavier. The committee members on the dais exchanged grim, silent looks. The denial had failed. Jayapal had meticulously proven that the missing records were not a clerical error but a targeted political action disguised as bureaucracy. The missing file number was the forensic key. But the silence wasn't over yet. The escalation was immediate, yet Jayapal's tone remained the same. Calm, journalistic, and lethal. She had cornered Patel on the law. Now she prepared to deliver the emotional and constitutional climax. She reached inside her binder and withdrew a single, UN-redacted document. Its color, a pale blue, denoting a high classification level, stood out starkly against the dark mahogany. Mr. Patel, you deny knowledge of the F-302 with the designation Trump OFC 43. You asserted your role was purely administrative, managing bulk transfer, not content, Jayapal began, her eyes locked onto his. However, I hold in my hand a declassified copy of an authorization to temporarily retain Federal Records Form, SF-135, generated by your office on January 19, 2021, the day before you left office. She slid the form across the table toward Patel, not aggressively, but with the quiet precision of a judge passing sentence. Patel reached for it, his hand unsteady. His lead attorney immediately placed a cautionary hand on his arm, but it was too late. Patel's eyes scanned the form. The timestamp, the inventory codes, and the final signature line, his signature, were all real. The clock started. 47 seconds. The form listed only 3 specific files authorized for temporary, non-NORO retention under the guise of an ongoing classification audit. The third file listed was, unequivocally, the missing F-302 Trump OFC 43. The document provided the exact first 3 lines of the witness summary it contained. The summary began, witness stated, under oath, that on 3 occasions, the president requested direct updates on Epstein's status, using his personal cell phone, bypassing DOJ protocols. Patel froze. The color drained from his face, leaving him a ghastly white under the fluorescent lights. His eyes fixated on the phrase "the president" and the inventory number he had just denied knowing. His head snapped up, meeting Jayapal's gaze in a look of absolute, naked panic. He opened his mouth to speak, but only a dry, rattling noise escaped the microphone. This was the moment competence collapsed. Jayapal did not rush the silence. She let the 47 seconds tick by, allowing the cameras to capture the total breakdown of his professional facade. The moment visually confirmed the crime. The official not only knew about the document but had personally signed the order to unlawfully retain it, concealing its existence from NORO and, crucially, from Congress. Mr. Patel, Jayapal finally said, her voice cutting through the ringing silence. By signing this form, you committed 3 distinct legal failures. 1. You violated 44 U.S.C. Section 2207, the Presidential Records Act, by asserting administrative control over a record after your authority had technically ceased. 2. You violated 18 U.S.C. Section 1505 by attempting to conceal or influence a congressional proceeding, this hearing, by actively denying knowledge of the key documents sought by this committee. She paused, leaning forward until she was merely a foot from the microphone. And 3, and most fatally, the contents of this F-302, which specifically details a former president's unauthorized attempt to influence an active criminal inquiry using unofficial channels, is material evidence. By unlawfully removing this evidence, you violated the Due Process Clause of the Fifth Amendment as interpreted in Brady v. Maryland, which requires the government to disclose material exculpatory or impeachment evidence. You chose to obstruct justice not for institutional protection, but for political survival, denying the American public and the judicial system the truth. The room erupted, not with shouting, but with the mechanical whirring of shutters and the hurried shuffling of papers. Patel slumped, the posture of rigid defense dissolving into complete defeat. His legal ignorance was exposed as a lie. His administrative role was proven to be a mask for political obstruction. This was a direct, documentable failure to uphold the most basic tenets of constitutional governance, the lawful custody of truth. The failure was fatal because it proved intent. It was not a mistake. It was a signed, dated decision to hide the record detailing a high-level cover-up. The man who came in to defend his record had, in 47 seconds, signed his political epitaph. But the silence wasn't over yet. The aftermath was immediate, explosive, and devastating. Within the hour, the footage of Patel's silent, 47-second collapse had become the defining image of government accountability failure. The news cycle was instantly consumed, and the narrative was uniform across the ideological spectrum. The system had worked, but only after a high-level, intentional breach had been exposed. The commentary began instantly. CNN's lead legal analyst, a former Solicitor General, appeared visibly shaken. Constitutional scholars are calling this the most devastating Senate takedown since Watergate, he reported. The genius of Senator Jayapal's approach was focusing not on the content of the cover-up, but on the custody of the evidence. She used the dry, bureaucratic rules of the Federal Records Act and the Espionage Act to prove criminal intent. Patel's signed SF-135 form is not just a lie. It's a confession to violating multiple criminal statutes by retaining material evidence. For 47 seconds, America watched competence collapse, replaced by the grim reality of political self-preservation. On conservative news outlets, the focus was less on the politics of the cover-up and more on the institutional damage. One prominent host lamented, "This isn't about who the president was. It's about the fact that a politically appointed official felt he had the right to unilaterally remove and conceal documents related to a federal sex crimes investigation. It's an institutional failure of the Department of Justice's Records Management Division and raises serious questions about the political weaponization of classified information within the EOP transition." The consensus was that Patel was politically radioactive and institutionally compromised. The political consequences materialized rapidly. Within 2 hours, the Department of Defense announced that Patel's security clearance was suspended pending a full review by the Inspector General. The Justice Department, operating independently of the political furor, released a terse, 2-line statement confirming they had received a formal referral from the SSCI citing potential violations of 18 U.S.C. Section 2071, concealment, removal, or mutilation, and 18 U.S.C. Section 1621, perjury, for his testimony regarding the F-302 retention form. The referral was the most potent signal of a likely indictment. Meanwhile, the public outcry focused on the fact that the missing F-302 file explicitly named the president's personal involvement in tracking the Epstein case, a clear breach of standard communication protocols between the executive office and independent criminal inquiries. The constitutional failure, as articulated by Jayapal, became the moral center of the scandal, the deliberate sacrifice of due process and truth in favor of political insulation. Legal experts were quick to point out that the evidence of obstruction was now documentary and incontrovertible. The failure here wasn't abstract, explained a constitutional law professor on cable news. It's a failure of the due process clause because Patel's retention of the file directly hindered the ability of investigators to follow leads, potentially compromising the rights of victims and subverting the judicial process. This isn't just a political scandal. It's a legal one with lasting implications for how transitions of power handle politically sensitive evidence. The day ended with a single, clear image broadcast on every network. A detail shot of the signed SF-135 form. The inventory number F-302 Trump OFC 43 circled in red. A testament to the fact that one signature could shatter a career and expose a massive institutional lie. Patel had become the living embodiment of the breakdown of the checks and balances system. His political career was over, but the investigation into the broader cover-up had just begun. But the silence wasn't over yet. The final chapter of the hearing did not take place in the ornate hearing room. It unfolded in the quiet hallways of power, in the closed-door deliberation rooms, and in the reflective silence of the committee members. It was a meditation on the moral consequences of institutional protection, framed by the cold calculus of the law. Patel's defeat was not just personal, it was institutional. It laid bare the fragile boundary between a public servant's duty to the office and their loyalty to a political principle. Senator Jayapal, speaking to reporters hours later, framed the moral closure not as a victory, but as a reaffirmation of the oath of office, an oath sworn to the Constitution, not to a president. The failure of Mr. Patel, she stated, was his attempt to use bureaucratic process as a shield for political obstruction. The Federal Records Act is dry, yes, but it is the skeletal structure of our democracy. It ensures that the actions of the government are recorded, catalogued, and accessible, guaranteeing the institutional memory necessary for accountability. When you violate that, when you hide a record detailing high-level political influence on a criminal case, you are violating the fundamental right of the public to know the truth, a right implicitly guaranteed by the entire framework of the First and Fifth Amendments. The fallout confirmed a cynical truth about Washington. The system does not tolerate ignorance, but it ruthlessly punishes those who leave documentary evidence of their self-serving actions. Patel's attempts to confuse the issue by citing CUI protocols and administrative mergers were dismissed. The only thing that mattered was the existence of his signature on the SF-135 form, explicitly authorizing the unlawful retention of the F-302 file. He had committed the ultimate legal sin in Washington. He provided the receipt. The political world had already moved on, calculating the secondary and tertiary damage to the former administration. The narrative shifted from the scandal of the cover-up to the certainty of the criminal referral. The institutional consequences were clear. The Senate had reasserted its investigative primacy. The Department of Justice was compelled to act on the clear evidence of statutory violation, and a cautionary tale was etched into the minds of every high-ranking official remaining in Washington. The reflection was somber. The unwritten law of silence in Washington dictates that loyalty is often valued above the law until that loyalty leaves a paper trail. Patel's career ended not with a bang of partisan warfare, but with the quiet sound of a senator placing a signed government form into the public record. The most intelligent, moral, and enduring part of the system proved to be the meticulous record-keeping designed to catch those who try to subvert it. The truth, in this hyper-realistic political drama, was not shouted from a podium. It was simply documented in ink. The hearing room was dark now, the static microphones unplugged. The polished mahogany table still reflected the dim emergency lighting from the hallway, silent, empty, and waiting for the next reckoning. Some careers end in scandal. His ended in silence.